On today's show, the Pistons keep losing. Will they break the record for the longest losing streak in league history? It doesn't look good for Detroit. Plus, are the Grizzlies with Ja Morant a team that we should take seriously? We talk about that, Zion's non-guaranteed contract, and a whole lot more on today's Locked On NBA.
You are Locked On NBA, your daily NBA podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On NBA. Wes Goldberg here with Adam Mares. However you might be tuning in on YouTube, Odyssey, or your favorite podcast app, thanks so much for making Locked On NBA your first listen every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA and use the code, all lowercase, LockedOnNBA, for a first deposit match up to $100. We'll get to whether the Pelicans would ever consider cutting Zion Williamson in a bit. But let's start in Detroit, where the Pistons lost to the Jazz 119-111. The Pistons have lost 25 games in a row. One short of the all-time single-season record of 26. That record, Adam, was set by the 2010-11 Cavs and the 2013-2014 76ers. What's crazy is that the Pistons were actually favored in this game because the Jazz were without Larry Markkinen, no Jordan Clarkson, no Keontae George, no Taylor Horton-Tucker. This was a 4-point game with 2.5 minutes left, but then the Jazz scored 7 straight to put this one away. Adam, this is a rebuilding season for Detroit, but losing 25 games in a row is never good. Pistons fans were chanting to fire the coach, fire the GM, for the owner to sell the team. What do you make of this losing streak?
It's rough. I mean, this is really rough. And to your point, if you're going to lose this game, who are you going to beat? It doesn't get any easier than this. You're already talking about one of the bottom 5 teams, and then you take out their best player. So this to me is really disheartening. You feel for the Detroit Pistons and what they're going through. After the game, Cade said, I don't think we're this bad. Like, I know we're bad, but we're not 2-26 bad. But I'm afraid the truth is they might just be this bad.
They're pretty bad. And like you said, it doesn't get easier anytime soon. Their next few games, I mean, I'm just going to look at the schedule here, at Brooklyn and then at home against Brooklyn. That's not, I mean, they're better.
Brooklyn is vulnerable. Though. I will say this. Brooklyn's vulnerable. I'm not picking them to win if they lose to the Jazz, but Brooklyn's at least volatile.
But if you don't win that, if you don't win those games, Boston, I mean, maybe Toronto at home, maybe that's an opportunity, but then you're on the road in Houston, in Utah, in Golden State, in Denver. I mean, I don't know how much longer this is going to go. So either way, 25 games, 26 games. If they break the record with a 27-game losing streak, it's fine. Look, nobody really expected the Pistons to be good. And if you kind of zoom out, I don't know that this losing streak is that big of a deal. I mean, I mentioned those other teams, like the 2010-11 Cavs. They won a championship a few years later. They stunk that season, ended up getting Kyrie Irving with and then they got getting LeBron a few years later and stuff like that. Like, a lot of stuff had to happen, but it wasn't the end of the franchise. The 76ers, that was the process 76ers, right? The difference between those teams and this Pistons team was that they've already been bad for many years. They've kind of already gone through the process, and they hired Monty Williams and made him the highest paid coach in the league to try to take kind of like a Houston Rockets type of leap. I think that's maybe what they were expecting to do, have Monty Williams come in, set the culture, all these things.
That's why.
And that obviously has not happened. And so I understand. I get it. Like, the Pistons fans are totally right to be calling for jobs and all these things. I understand the frustration. Even if you're bad, you got to win some games here and there just for a proof of concept. And I don't know that if you're a Pistons fan, you have a whole lot of stuff to feel good about right now.
It doesn't feel like they're building anything. That's the difference, is when you lose 26 games or 24 in a row. Now, I don't know anything about this, we haven't really seen it, but I have to imagine when you lose 10 games in a row, it's tough on morale. It's tough on confidence. What habits are you building? Is it possible to be building good habits while losing this much? I don't think it is. And then, earlier this year, they've had some weird things with Jaden Ivey starting and not starting. And is he playing 15 minutes some nights? And you think, what's going on? Now you have Asar Thompson, who is back on the bench. And I love this kid. Like, part of me, another thing is the development right for a guy like that when you know how irregular sort of his season has been? Here playing heavy minutes, with Wiseman and stuff tonight, and he looked absolutely terrible, I thought. So to me, I look at this and I just go, it's not losing with a purpose. You could say, okay, there's something going on, but this doesn't feel like that. And And then Wes, my other take on this is last year at the same time through 27-ish games, nobody had fewer than 7 losses or 7 wins. Sorry, 7 wins. This year, there are 3 teams with fewer than 7 wins and 2 teams with 7 wins. We thought that the play-in tournament was going to end tanking and maybe bring a little bit more parity because you're in it longer. And that was true last year. It's not true this year. You look around and you go, the Spurs are 4-23. They're out of the playoff race before Christmas. Portland's 7-19. They're probably out of the race. Detroit's 2-26, out of the race. Washington 4-22, out of the race. Charlotte 7-19. Only because it's the East are they not out of the race. So I look at this and I go, it's weird that we got the play-in and we still have teams that have historically bad records.
And you know what's crazy is that they're not even fully tanking. Like a lot of these teams thought they would be winning more games, like Washington, Detroit. They thought they would be better than this. They just stink by accident, which is even worse for their fans. I can't imagine that that's awesome to cheer for. But let's go to Memphis, where the Grizzlies beat the Pacers 116-103 to improve to 2-0 with Ja Morant this season. Morant, 20 points and 8 assists in this one. Desmond Bane finished with 31 points, 6 rebounds, 7 assists in a big third quarter to power that and lead the Grizzlies to the win. They outscored the Pacers 58-47 in the second half, a so-so game for Tyrese Halliburton. But the Grizzlies are 8-19, okay? But they do look much better with Ja Morant back. I mean, they look like a completely different team. They look like the Grizzlies, right?
Yeah.
So what do you make of the Grizzlies right now?
Well, I'm impressed with Ja Morant. I mean, it's I know it's simple to say, but to have the game winner and the game that he had in his first game back was unbelievable. No rust and no loss of confidence. You think of all the things that he's been through, and like, it's high profile that he is sort of being scolded and you got to go to therapy and you got to do all these different things. And instead he comes out, looks like no confidence is shaken at all. And even though the numbers in tonight's game don't really pop out at you for what he had, I thought he was phenomenal.
Yeah.
So I don't know if I'm ready, because it's only been 2 games, to say it looks like the old Grizzlies. But what I will say is, you look at where they are in the standings, their season kind of looks like it's over. I think they're still 6 games back of the play-in. So it's still hard to even imagine, but they're not treating it like that. They're treating it like, you know what, let's go. The season starts now and let's claw our way out of it. And that's it's kind of awesome to see, to be honest.
I mean, they were 28th in the league in points in the paint before Ja Morant got back. And granted, it's only been 2 games, but in those 2 games, they outscored the Pelicans, who do all of their work in the paint, 62-50 in the paint. And then they outscored the Pacers tonight, 48-32 in the paint. And that's the Grizzlies formula, right? Get to the basket, pressure the rim. And that's with a bunch of injuries. Still no Brandon Clark, still no Steven Adams, and all these things. I really like the way Zion Williams has looked, just like a small little note over these last 3 or 4 games. I'm like, oh, am I a believer in Zion Williams now? I kind of like what they've got going on with him. But to go back to your point, 6 games behind Phoenix now for the 10th seed. The West is loaded. I don't know that anybody's sitting here expecting them Memphis. It just feels like the suspension and the record before the suspension, it kind of sunk them in too big of a hole. They would basically need 43, 44 wins, any team in the West, to make the play-in tournament, probably around that range. So that basically means that means that Memphis basically have to go 35-20 the rest of the way. They have one of the hardest remaining schedules in the league. Again, I know that's not really the point here, but I was curious. I just looked it up because I've been that impressed with the Grizzlies in 2 games with Ja Morant. You know what I mean? So that's sort of where we're at.
Real quick, let me just say the other side of things is more important to me and more interesting, because you go to the in-season tournament final, you have that great run and the great open to your season. You come out of that and you beat Detroit, because everybody beats Detroit, as we just mentioned, and then you lose to Milwaukee, lose to Washington, lose to the Timberwolves, lose to the Clippers, beat Charlotte, lose to Memphis. To me, I look at this and I go, this is really rough. The in-season tournament seems to have done a number on the Pacers in a way that maybe it's worth it for a team like them. It was worth it to get this and get that experience and this, that. But I do wonder, is the more we get removed from the in-season tournament, the more we kind of see the full effect of it, the full scope. And maybe these things are coincidental, but 2-5 coming out of that hurts more than making for the big picture. It hurts so much.
It does. And it doesn't even feel like it's a physical toll. That's a young team. They're still getting up and down. Like, they're not scoring as much, but it feels almost like an emotional toll. Like they got in over their skis and now they're like tumbling over the emotional mountain. They're just like, oh my God, what just happened in Las Vegas? You got like that post-Vegas hangover that you and I would have after going to Vegas, not necessarily a basketball team going for a tournament. It is a little strange. It does feel like a little bit of a hangover going on.
I thought tonight Halliburton looked a little cement-legged. So
that's fair.
He's the one guy that, to me, and I mean, obviously he's the most important one, and he's the engine. So I don't know. It's just something to monitor because
they were on the second night of a back-to-back.
They were on a second night of a back-to-back, but to lose 5 of 6, we'll see if this ends up keep it keeps going. Honestly, if the Lakers and the Pacers, both the teams that went to the final, if they have a horrible December, I think it will influence how teams approach the in-season tournament going forward. Maybe it's only a little bit, but I do think teams will look at that and be like, yeah, but you remember what happens to the 2 teams that pushed too hard last year.
Could be interesting. We're going to move on. Zion Williamson, some new news that his contract is not guaranteed, putting his future in New Orleans in question. We'll talk about how big of a deal it really is after this on Locked On NBA. Today's episode of Locked On NBA is brought to you by BetterHelp. Whether or not your family gifts during the holidays, you get to define how you give to yourself. And the holidays are a great time to do that. So whether it's by starting therapy, going easier on yourself during the tough moments, or treating yourself to a day of complete rest, remember to give yourself some love this holiday season. It's helpful for learning positive coping skills, therapy is, and how to set boundaries. It empowers you to be the best version of yourself. It isn't just for those who've experienced major trauma and things like that. Everybody can use therapy and everybody can use BetterHelp. So if you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist, and then you could switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. This is all tailored to you. In a season of giving, give yourself what you need with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. Thanks for making Locked On NBA your first listen every day. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. So go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. A few more notable scores from Thursday night before we get to the Zion drama. The Bucks beat the Magic 118-114. 37, 10, and 7 for Giannis, 24 points and 8 assists for Damian Lillard. The Magic nearly came back in this one. On the second night of a back-to-back for them, Franz Wagner and Paolo Banchero combined for 52 points in the game, but the Bucks ended up escaping with the win. The Thunder beat the Clippers thanks to 31 points from one Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and 23 points from Chet Holmgren. The Clippers on the second night of a back-to-back were without Kawhi Leonard for the first time this season, although it does not sound like it's going to be a long-term issue. But with Kawhi, I guess you never know. The loss ends.
A little rest, a little back-to-back rest. Kawhi's been playing unbelievably.
Yeah.
So Paul George also out tonight, by the way.
Big game.
Oh, no, he was in. He played.
Paul George played, and it was a good game for him. And then James Harden was there and doing James Harden things. But good win for the Thunder. The loss also ends the Clippers' 9-game win streak. So there goes that. The Pelicans went into Cleveland and beat the Cavs without Donovan Mitchell. Also, still no Darius Garland, no Evan Mobley for the Cavs. Trey Murphy III, your guy, had
my guy.
Points. The Pelicans won 123-104. Any notes on the Pelicans and Cavs?
Just on Trey Murphy, man. He's one of those guys who I think is in between role player and star. He's not quite a full star. I mean, he's still young. He's got a lot in front of him. But nights like tonight, when you watch him, 10 of 16, it wasn't just like. You think of him as a spot-up shooter because that's kind of how he came into the league, like a 3-and-D type guy. But he's got a little on-the-ground game. He's got a little creation. He's a really interesting player. I remain so high on all of the New Orleans Pelicans players except for 2. Their main 2 guys.
Feels like Mikal Bridges walked so Trey Murphy III could run.
Maybe. I mean, it's a good comp, honestly. It's a good comp. He's a heck of a player, man. I just love watching him.
Let's go to the Chicago Bulls. They keep stacking wins. They beat the Spurs 114-95. They've won 8 of their last 11. They're now, don't look now, a half game back out of the play-in tournament in the East. That turnaround is pretty incredible. I wish there was just one thing that we could point to that could cause this turnaround. I don't really know what it might be, though. What do you think?
I think playing free, a lot of guys getting opportunity, Patrick Williams, and of course Kobe White. And he would be my other thing. It's just Kobe White. The guy, a lot of times when a star steps down and there is another player behind that star, the situation that Kobe White finds himself in, they get in there and they take 26 shots a game. They shoot 33%. And it's like, hey, man, I finally get to drive dad's car.
Yeah.
I'm going a little crazy.
You call that the Jordan Pool in some parts.
The Jordan Pool, 100%, man. The Jordan Pool. Kobe White, 10 of 15 tonight. The efficiency is impressive, but the 15 is impressive. He played 36 minutes more than anybody else. And the restraint to only take 15 shots when he is the type of mold player he is. And it's not just tonight. This whole run has been that way, where he's been aggressive but in control. The
playmaking has stood out with him. He is very much in control of the pace of the game. When I said that I wish there was one thing that I could point to, that was a joke that obviously did not land. I was talking about Zach LaVine going out with the injury, but we'll just keep it moving here. Let's go to Minnesota, where the Timberwolves beat the Lakers. No LeBron James for the Lakers, but Anthony Davis did play. He had 31 points in this one, but it was Anthony Edwards, 27 points. All 5 Wolves starters scored in double digits. I love Anthony Edwards. I know I'm not breaking news. I know if you're a consumer of NBA content, you probably also love Anthony Edwards. But this was a 5-point game with 5 minutes left. Anthony Edwards gets a layup and one, and then finds on the very next possession, Nickeil Alexander-Walker for a 3-pointer in the corner, just whips a pass with the opposite hand into the corner, finds him standing there wide open, drains that, boom, goes from a 5-point game to an 11-point game with just under 5 minutes, like 4.5 to go, which is not the end of a game by any stretch, right? Mathematically, but it kind of felt over to me in that moment. Anthony Edwards just grabbed the game and took it over.
The reason it wasn't over is because right after that, he took like 3 bad shots in a row.
But we don't need to talk about that.
I think he had coming out of a timeout. He was standing in front of the Lakers bench, and you're like you said, they're up 9 or something like that as a minute just played out, and you could see him jawing with Jared Vanderbilt. I can't remember who else it was, and he kind of gets this look, and I could just tell. I was like, oh, he's going to take a bad shot here, and sure enough, he did. But nonetheless, they still get the win. It was never in doubt.
Let's talk about Zion Williamson.
Okay.
All right. According to The Athletic, by missing more than 22 games last year, Zion triggered a clause that turned his salary that he's owed for the 2025-26 season, the 26-27 season, and the 27-28 season. So 3 seasons following next season. Those seasons have now gone from guaranteed to non-guaranteed. Okay, so that means that the Pelicans have the contractual power to just waive Zion after the 2024-25 season at 0 penalty cost to them. Now, everybody knows it's unlikely that the Pelicans would ever just waive Zion and lose him for nothing. Even if he's out of shape or underperforming, he's still got so much talent, and they have too much invested in him to just cut bait and get nothing back. But this report did get a lot of people talking. Is it a really big deal, or is it just a lot to do about nothing now?
I think it's a big deal. Now, it's not necessarily a big deal because the Pelicans are going to waive Zion. Let's just be clear about that.
Yes.
It's not a big deal. But what's a big deal is that they built this into his contract for a reason. They did not trust him, both physically and also when you talk about weight clauses, you're talking about like, we don't trust you to do the right thing. Well, fast forward, and guess what? Those were it was smart that they did this because clearly he has underperformed. But now you get into it's not about the contract. It's about but how do we handle the situation part of it? And clearly their best bet forward is still with Zion, just getting it together. But to me, it's wild to think that Zion sat down and put pen to paper on a contract that says, as long as you stay in good shape and stay healthy, you're going to make $200 million. And he was like, no, I don't know if I can do that.
Yeah. Well, it is so interesting, isn't it? Right. I mean, I guess when you're sitting down and you're signing the contract, you have confidence in yourself to get things under control. But there's been enough reporting around Zion right now where it almost sounds like there's like I hate to use the phrase eating disorder, but that's like kind of the context clues around this thing. And that's kind of what we're talking about here. One weird thing about this contract that I didn't mention at first, it does have the ability to switch back, at least according to John Hollinger from The Athletic, to switch back to guaranteed if you meet certain clauses and gameplay things. So it can go from like non-guaranteed to guaranteed to non-guaranteed, just kind of flip back and forth. So TBD, I guess, on all of this. But for now, those 3 years are non-guaranteed in the contract based on the clauses they didn't meet this last time. You would hope that this would just motivate him. Maybe this is the wake-up call. Maybe this is, hey, oh my God, all this money's not guaranteed anymore. I better
That's
get
scary,
things in order, right?
And when would you trigger this? You trigger this in like a final year or something like that. Your guy gets hurt or something happens where it's like, hey man, the only path forward now is this way. So while I don't think it's like a likely or like remotely likely scenario where they actually would have to like say, hey, no, we're going to waive this contract, it is at least a slightly more real. And if you're Zion, that shouldn't be your motivating factor. But as I mentioned, I love this Pelicans team. I think it is such a sleeping giant if they could just get their star players, because I actually think Brandon Ingram belongs in this conversation as well. He's another guy that's kind of missed, and teammates have even called him out a little bit, soft call outs and saying, hey, we need our guys to play. CJ McCollum famously earlier in the year said, it doesn't make sense to me, some of these young guys not playing these days. I never take for granted the fact that I'm a professional basketball player. So for me, I just think that's the thing is it points to what I think is a real tragedy in the NBA, that this Pelicans team to me should be title contenders, not even playoff contenders, title contenders, but they just need their main guy to kind of be up to the lowest bar to clear, which is stay healthy and stay in shape.
And let's be real here. I mean, if you just waive Zion for nothing, you're basically signaling a rebuild, right? Because Ingram's contract comes up around that same time that these deals come. Zion's contract becomes non-guaranteed. CJ McCollum's contract will be expired by then. Like, we like Trey Murphy III. We like Herb Jones. We like all these guys. But you're not building a championship team around those guys, at least not what they seem to be right now. And so the one weird thing is if those 3 years are non-guaranteed, Zion becomes much more tradable. And now that becomes like the best expiring salary in the league, or the biggest one, I should say, at $40 million, right? And so if you're another team trying to maybe start your rebuild process and get off of a star, if you're the Pelicans, you're like, hey, here's Zion's super non-guaranteed contract. Do with it whatever you would like to do. Maybe you take a chance on Zion, waive him. It's up to you. And then like a couple of draft picks or whatever it is. And then maybe you can get a star who's making $40 million. And that way you don't have to do the full Detroit Pistons style teardown. And you can just kind of, hey, let's add another kind of big high wattage player with Murphy, with Herb Jones, with all these other guys. So
I'll give you a scenario.
It's going to be the most talked about contract in the league for the next half decade, basically.
This is the only scenario where I think, like, if you start to get like really reckless, and where could a trade or this happen? If you look at the Clippers situation, the Clippers are playing great right now. It doesn't look to be the case that they'll flame out. But if for whatever reason things fell apart there, you can imagine, like you just said, that this Pelicans roster is not good enough without Zion. I kind of disagree. If you were to swap, for example, Zion Williamson, for sake of argument, Zion Williamson and Paul George typically not thought of as a guy capable of being a number one, right, on a contender. Mm-hmm. But this role, the role players on this team, with how many wings they have, how many impact players they have, I would actually be intrigued by a team that had that roster. So to me, I can foresee a world, not that they waive him, but I can foresee a world in which they trade Zion and lose the trade in a vacuum. But it's like, you know what? It's been 3 years, 4 years of this. We can't count on this guy. And we have all these pieces we built, and we don't want it to completely tear down. So let's build around Paul George, or let's build around, another player that's not thought of as a number one.
No, you and I agree on that for sure. All right. Coming up, we look ahead to the Christmas Day slate and the biggest matchups in those games. That's all next here on Locked On NBA. Today's episode of Locked On NBA is brought to you by Prize Picks. Prize Picks is the largest daily fantasy sports platform in North America. It's the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. It's just you against the numbers. Instead of battling thousands of other players, including pros and sharks, you pick more than or less than on 2 to 6 player stat projections, and then watch the winnings roll in. With the basketball season here, you can now pick combo projections across football and basketball from the Specials League, a league created specifically for combo projections that include 2 or more players from different sports or leagues. For instance, LeBron James plus Travis Kelce at 10.5 combo of 3-pointers made and receptions. PrizePicks even offers a reboot policy so that your entries stay in play even if one of the players in your entries gets injured. For football and basketball games, if you have a player who exits the game in the first half and does not return in the second half, that player is rebooted. PrizePicks is the only daily fantasy sports platform with an injury insurance policy. So if you want to play on Prize Picks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA. Use the code LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA. Use the code LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Thanks for making Locked On NBA your first listen every day. It's Friday, which means it's time to count down to the weekend. What do you have for us today, Adam?
Well, we have Christmas coming up on Monday. So I thought we would look at these games and just talk about the matchups, talk about the head-to-head matchups of the most interesting matchups between the teams playing.
Let's do it.
Let's start with Bucks Knicks. I will just go in chronological order here. So we'll start on the East Coast. This is the game here on the West Coast. I know you East Coasters, man. This is like midday. For me, this is like I'm still in pajamas.
What time's the first game? 11 a.m.?
What is it out here? It's 10 a.m. 10 a.m. Yeah, so I'm going slow, man. I opened gifts a little bit. Maybe I'm playing with some of the new toys with the kids or what have you. But it's still early, so I'm not really paying too close of attention. But we got the Bucks at the Knicks. And for me, this one is Dame versus Brunson. This is the guard matchup for me because both of these guys are capable of putting up monster numbers. I think Jalen Brunson fancies himself a Dame Lillard caliber player. And this is a big stage. So for me, I look at this one and go, I think Brunson has a chance to go off. We know he just had the 50 piece. I think Dame Lillard could go off. I like this matchup between those two dudes.
This one's going to be at Madison Square Garden. So Jalen Brunson's also going to be like, hey, this is my house, right? And this is my day. This is my showcase. So I'm with you on that. I am interested to see the Giannis versus Jalen Brunson matchup because Giannis is going to hunt him in those mismatches, and I am interested to see how the Knicks sort of match that up, pre-switch, do whatever they got to do to try to get out of that matchup. But the Bucks are very predatorial, and we'll see what they do. But it's going to be a good one because, like you said, it's Jalen Brunson, his place, home court advantage, but it's also Damian Lillard in a primetime matchup, and we know how Dame usually responds to those kinds of situations. So it'll be a good one.
This is your moment, Jalen Brunson. Go for it. The next game, Warriors at Nuggets. I'll be working this one. This matchup to me, it's not a head-to-head matchup, but I think Steph Curry and Nikola Jokic, in whatever order you want to go, are number one and number two offensive engines of the last 20 years. Offensive engines. You could probably throw a James Harden in there somewhere, although I think less playoff success doing that style. But these two guys are just so impactful on every single possession. I think that this is just going to be the most beautiful game to watch as you see both of these guys kind of doing their thing in the offense they create.
And both teams, a lot of movement, a lot of cutting, just a lot of up and down. This is to me the game I'm second most excited for.
Second most, okay.
The one I'm most excited for.
It's not Knicks, Bucks. Okay, we'll keep going. Maybe we'll stumble upon it. Celtics, Lakers coming up next. I think this one. I went with the obvious one on this one. Anthony Davis and Kristaps Porzingis. Anthony Davis is a monster, especially on marquee games when he's like dialed in and focused. He's a monster defensively, but Porzingis represents that like pick and pop threat that is so hard for bigs to cover. So that's my matchup in that one that I think is most interesting. There's not a lot of direct one-to-one matchups around the rest of the court in this one, like LeBron, Jason Tatum. I don't think it's necessarily like a one-on-one matchup there. But that one, I think
it'll be interesting to see who LeBron guards and what ends up being the matchup. Is LeBron going to be on Jaylen Brown? Do the Celtics? They've kind of gotten weird with some of their mismatches. Like they could put Drew Holiday on LeBron. They've gotten weird with Drew Holiday and where they put him. So who knows? But I know that we're doing matchups here. I don't really care. It's LeBron James on Christmas. That's what I want to see. And whoever he's guarding and whoever's guarding him, that's the matchup I care the most about in this one.
This is a terrible game, except for what you just said. Like, if any other circumstance would be like, this is going to be horrible, but we're like, it's LeBron. We got to give him the respect. Marquee game. 76ers at Heat. Wait a second. This got to be the one. Oh, okay.
We found it.
We found it. And where else could I go? Joel Embiid versus Bam Adebayo.
Yeah.
Embiid is going through the league right now. Rudy Gobert. Karl-Anthony Towns, doesn't matter. Daniel Gafford, doesn't matter who he's going through. He's carving him up right now. But while I don't think Bam is the single best defensive big in the NBA, I think Gobert is like a tougher matchup usually. the Miami Heat are very good at preparing for games and coming up with a good scheme. So I just look at this one and I go, and nobody has slowed Embiid at all. I think Bam is extremely disciplined and is not going to put him on the foul line like everyone else does, at least not as much. And I think that Miami Heat team is going to be prepared for that game. So that's my matchup.
I think you saw the strategy a little bit. It might be a little bit different, but you saw the strategy during the NBA Finals with Bam fronting Nikola Jokic over and over and over. And I think that's probably what we'll see with Embiid. In this one, the Heat are also an early help team. They're going to send doubles and they're going to do all that stuff. And they're going to do it strategically. They'll switch up the timing. They'll throw some zone in there. They'll sprinkle that in. So Spo's going to have a bunch of different schemes. He's going to toggle between them and pull different levers in this one. I'm very interested to see it. But to your point, Adam, like this is a chance for Bam to maybe become the defensive player of the year favorite, because we just saw Joel Embiid put 51 points on Rudy Gobert's head. He's on, according to FanDuel, Rudy Gobert is the defensive player of the year favorite right now. But if Bam can limit Embiid in a way that Gobert could not, there's your highlight reel for DPOY, right? For Bam. So I think this is a huge game for Bam. And by the way, if anybody knows that, it's Bam. He's been chomping at the bit to try to get into this defensive player of the year conversation. So
also just the intimidation factor that Miami brings. You know, they've been through big games before. Minnesota, I thought the other night, the lights were a little bright, you know, like they could feel it was a marquee game. Like Miami, man, they've been through so many of these. And then the last game, look, Wes, you're going to be asleep. I know the East Coasters out there never pay attention to the West Coast game. It's too late for you. 10:30 start time.
12:30 in the morning right now.
That's right, as we're recording this, and it's earlier than usual. Usually later. No, Mavs at Suns, and I just Luka at versus Booker again. Another one where it's not necessarily head to head, but these guys seem to bring out the best in each other, especially Luka bring out the best in Luka. And while I think the Mavericks are not good, and I think the Suns are not good, this one feels like it'll actually mean a lot to both teams. So
do we get some trash talking on Christmas between Luka and Booker? Is the holiday spirit going to get in the way, or are they going to be a couple of Grinches?
I think they'll be in the holiday spirit. Not Luka's Christmas. He's on the Serbian calendar. Very different. So for him, just a normal game, just a Monday night game.
Just a Monday night game on ESPN against the Phoenix Suns. Very good. Well, it is the holidays for us here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Of course, the Monday night show will have a recap of all of those games. But in the meantime, thanks so much for making Locked On NBA your first listen every day. Everydayers, make sure you're subscribed on YouTube, Odyssey, and wherever you get your podcasts.